Hello there again. Here we are at the beginning of lesson 2.1 and we're starting our first recipe in this series. This video, it's pretty self-explanatory, so we'll get right into it. And as a reminder, this is the second video of 13 in this series, and these 13 videos correspond to chapter 2 in the book The Soap Making Companion, which you can download for free at the link below. Now also, feel free to go over and explore the crafters community on the Thermal Mermaid blog website, and come on over to our Facebook group or our community forum if you have any questions about anything that you see here in this video. Now make sure to subscribe and click the notification on this channel so that you can get notified when the next recipe in this series is released. And with that, we shall proceed. In lesson 2.1, we're going to jump right in with our first recipe. This is a combination of base oils that will produce a white or bright off-white bar of soap. This recipe will make 1 pound of soap, and we're going to start lesson 2.1 off with discussing trace in this recipe. In fact, all of lesson 2 really revolves around the trace of your recipe because nearly everything that you do or add can affect the trace, and this is what will help you master the designs that you want to make. Now first, we'll carefully make our lye water solution the way you learned in lesson 1. For this recipe, I need 6.06 ounces of cold distilled water and 2.26 ounces of sodium hydroxide lye crystals. Pour the lye crystals into the water and mix this until the crystals are completely dissolved. Then set this aside to cool to room temperature for about an hour. Next, melt the hard oils down with the soft oils until they're all one blended liquid. You will need 4.8 ounces of palm shortening, 4.8 ounces of lard, 3.2 ounces of coconut oil, 2.4 ounces of canola oil, and 0.8 ounces of castor oil. Set this aside to cool to room temperature if necessary. While we wait, we'll get the titanium dioxide ready. This is 1/2 teaspoon that has been blended down into about 1/2 ounce of water. You want to blend this down until it's smooth and the powdered granules are completely dissolved. If you don't break up those little pieces, they won't end up dissolving in the soap, and you'll get little white pills in your soap and it won't color the batter nicely. When the lye water solution has cooled and the temperature has dropped to within 15 to 20 degrees of the oils, it's time to blend these two parts together. Add any fragrance now, and in this demonstration I'll leave the fragrance out of the recipe. In this step, the oil and the water needs to be completely emulsified. Blend this together until it's completely incorporated. Now during this process, you'll start to see your soap change texture. This will go from a thin, watery liquid to a thick pudding texture. That thick texture of the soap batter is called the trace, and you're going to hear this term in nearly every recipe that you watch, read, or make from now on. Trace. This describes the texture of the freshly made soap batter during the emulsification process in soap making. When a small amount of the soap batter is spooned out and drawn across the surface of the soap, it leaves a trace. Now if that sinks back into the mix quickly, then this is said to have a thin trace. And if it soaks back into the mix slowly, then it's said to have a thick trace. Some people even say that you can trace a line across the surface of the batter, and that's where the name comes from. The trace of your soap batter becomes thicker when you blend and emulsify it with a stick blender. And some recipes can come to trace quickly, while other recipes can take a long time. Controlling the trace of the soap will become relevant when you're trying to craft your design. Now there are a list of factors that influence the trace of your recipe, and these are things that you can modify when you're trying to control the trace of your project. First, the combination of oils you use will influence the trace of the soap. As a general rule, heavy saturated fats and hard oils and butters are going to create a thick trace fairly quickly, while the thin, light, unsaturated fats, or the lighter oils, will take a longer time to trace. Now there are a few exceptions. For example, castor oil will trace fairly quickly. So an example of an oil that would bring you to a thick, quicker trace would be palm shortening, while olive oil is known to take a very long time to reach trace. Another factor that will control the trace of your recipe is the temperature of your oil and lye water. When you're working at hotter temperatures, the soap is more likely to accelerate and become thicker faster. To keep the soap thin for a longer period of time, make sure that you work with your oil and lye at room temperature, especially when you're beginning to blend these two parts together. A third influence over your recipe is the amount of water used in the recipe. Now, I typically write my recipes with the water at 33%, but this is just my preference. Some soap calculators will have that water percentage set at a different number. If you're working with a recipe that for you is becoming too thick too quickly, you can try adjusting the amount of water to 35 or even 38%, and this will make the batter a little bit more thin and give you more time to work. And another influence could be adding a fragrance oil that can change the behavior of your soap. Some fragrance oils are known to accelerate the soap, and your batter can sometimes become thick in a matter of seconds right before your eyes. Now you'll know if the fragrance oil that you're using will affect the trace of your soap by reading the information from the manufacturer's website. This is considered to be a very important characteristic of a fragrance oil, so the manufacturer will list this if the oil is known to bring your soap to trace quickly. So these four factors all affect the characteristics of your soap in regard to the trace. So as we move forward in these recipes, you'll find that if your recipe doesn't behave like the ones in the demonstrations, then you can start troubleshooting with any of these four attributes. Now, let's get our soap transferred into the molds. This recipe, you'll notice, is high in heavy, saturated fats, mostly hard oils. So one could expect that this recipe could be thick and come to trace in even under a minute. Now, since I'm molding these bars into pre-made molds, I want the soap to fill in all of the spaces down at the bottom, so I want to pour this while it's not too thick. Therefore, I have not mixed this too long, just past emulsification. Now, once this has been transferred into the mold, I'm going to let this firm up for a day and come back and unmold after the soap has set up. Once I'm ready to unmold, you can see that this is a pretty bright white bar. And this is only after 24 hours. As this cures, it will become even more light and brighten up over the next 6 weeks.